I stood frozen in my mother's pristine kitchen, staring at the elegant cream-colored invitation that would shatter my world. The afternoon sunlight streaming through the bay windows seemed to mock me as I read the guest list for Amanda's wedding, my sister's name written in flowing calligraphy at the top. What made my stomach drop wasn't what I saw, but what I didn't see. My name wasn't there. Instead, where Herbert Mitchell should have been listed among the family members, there was a harsh red line crossed through empty space with the word no scrawled in angry capital letters beside it. This wasn't the small, intimate gathering my parents had described when they casually mentioned Amanda was getting married next month. I grabbed the invitation and marched into the living room, where my parents sat watching their evening news program. The familiar scent of my mother's lavender candles couldn't calm the rage building in my chest as I slammed the paper down on their coffee table. Care to explain this? I demanded, my voice barely controlled. My father, Ronald, glanced up from his recliner with the same dismissive expression he'd worn throughout my childhood whenever I questioned his decisions. His graying hair was perfectly combed, his polo shirt pressed, despite being home all day. Herbert, we discussed this already. It's going to be a small ceremony. Small ceremony? I held up the guest list, my hands trembling with anger. Dad, there are over 100 names here. The Grandview Country Club isn't exactly intimate seating. My mother, Patricia, set down her wine glass with deliberate precision. She'd always been the family's master manipulator, using guilt and emotional warfare to maintain control. Sweetheart, you know things have been complicated since that business with your father's company. The business. 6 months ago, I discovered irregularities in Mitchell Construction's billing practices while helping Dad organize his office files. What started as innocent assistance became a nightmare when I found invoices for government projects that had been inflated by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Phantom work orders, duplicate billing materials that were never delivered but fully charged to taxpayer-funded municipal contracts. You mean since I found out you've been defrauding the city for 3 years? I shot back. Ronald's face flushed crimson as he stood up, his 6-foot frame still intimidating even at 62. You don't know what you're talking about, Herbert. Those projects were legitimately billed according to standard industry practices. Standard practices don't include charging for concrete that was never poured or electrical work that was subcontracted to companies that don't exist. Patricia intervened with her practiced peacekeeping voice. This is exactly why we thought it would be better if you didn't attend the wedding. You're clearly still upset about misunderstanding your father's business operations. Misunderstanding. I laughed bitterly. Mom, I have copies of everything. Invoices, bank transfers, correspondence with city officials. Dad's been systematically overcharging government contracts and pocketing the difference. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged a look that confirmed everything I'd suspected. This wasn't ignorance or denial. They knew exactly what they'd been doing. Amanda's voice from the hallway made us all turn. What's going on? My sister appeared in the doorway, still wearing her work clothes from the accounting firm where she managed our father's business accounts. At 28, Amanda had always been the family favorite, the dutiful daughter who never questioned authority and always supported family decisions without hesitation. Herbert's having another episode about Dad's business, Patricia explained with manufactured concern. Episode? I stared at my sister in disbelief. Amanda, you handle the books. You know exactly what's been happening with those municipal contracts. Amanda's expression hardened in a way I'd never seen before. I know that our family business provides jobs for 12 people and supports 3 families besides our own. I know that Dad has built something important in this community over 30 years. Built on fraud, I countered. Built on hard work and sacrifice, she snapped back. Something you'd understand if you'd ever committed to anything longer than 6 months. The personal attack stung because it contained enough truth to be weaponized. I'd changed jobs several times in my 20s, searching for meaningful work that aligned with my values. To my family, this made me unstable and unreliable. Ronald stepped closer, his voice dropping to the threatening tone he'd used when I was a teenager caught breaking curfew. Let me explain something to you, son. If you pursue this crusade of yours, you won't just destroy me. You'll destroy 12 jobs, 3 families, and everything I've worked for. Is your moral superiority worth that collateral damage? Is your fraud worth the damage to public trust? I fired back. This conversation is over, Patricia declared, but I wasn't finished. Who's Marcus Wellington? I asked, remembering seeing the name on several financial documents I'd photographed. Amanda's face went pale. Marcus is my fiancé. He's an investment advisor who's been helping Dad diversify the company's assets. Something cold settled in my stomach. What kind of investments? Ronald's jaw tightened. That's confidential business information. The kind of investments that help legitimize questionable income, I pressed. Amanda stood up abruptly, her voice rising to a pitch I'd never heard from her before. How dare you question Marcus's integrity? He's been nothing but supportive of our family during this difficult time. Difficult time that I created by discovering the truth. Difficult time that you created by being a self-righteous traitor who would rather destroy his own family than mind his own business, Amanda spat. The word traitor hung in the air like poison gas. My own sister had just labeled me an enemy for refusing to participate in criminal activity. Ronald sat back down heavily, suddenly looking older than his years. Herbert, I'm going to give you one last chance to be reasonable. Marcus has prepared some paperwork that would formalize your confidentiality regarding family business matters. Sign it, and we can move forward as a family. Refuse, and you're on your own. You're asking me to sign a non-disclosure agreement to cover up federal crimes. I'm asking you to be loyal to the people who raised you and supported you for 26 years, Patricia said, her voice cracking with what sounded like genuine emotion. I looked around the room at the 3 people I'd loved most in the world, realizing with heartbreaking clarity that they were asking me to choose between my moral conscience and my family relationships. The weight of that choice was crushing. I won't sign anything, I said quietly. Amanda's face crumpled as if I'd physically struck her. Then you're not welcome at my wedding. Amanda, please don't do this. You're doing this, she sobbed. You're choosing to destroy everything good in our lives because you think you're better than us. I walked toward the front door, pausing only when I heard my mother on the phone in the kitchen, her voice low but urgent. Marcus, it's Patricia. We have a problem. Herbert isn't going to be reasonable about the family situation. We need to discuss our options for handling this permanently. The word permanently sent ice through my veins. I quietly left through the front door, my mind reeling with the implications of what I'd just overheard. My family wasn't just excluding me from the wedding, they were planning something far more sinister to ensure my silence. 3 days later, I sat in an airport terminal with a one-way ticket to Maui and my entire savings account converted to cash. The decision to flee felt both cowardly and necessary. I'd spent 72 hours researching whistleblower protection programs and considering my options, but my mother's phone conversation about handling me permanently had made the choice clear. I needed distance and time to figure out how to navigate this nightmare without ending up disappeared. The flight to Hawaii felt surreal, like escaping into someone else's life. I'd used my middle name Douglas to book everything paying cash for a beachfront resort in Wailea that cost more per night than I usually spent in a month. But money seemed meaningless when you were potentially running for your life from your own family. Maui welcomed me with warm trade winds and the kind of natural beauty that makes you question why anyone lives anywhere else. The resort was elegant without being pretentious, filled with honeymooners and families celebrating vacations that represented the best moments of their lives. I felt like a fraud among all that happiness, carrying secrets that could destroy everything I'd ever known. On my second evening, I found myself at the resort's beachside bar, nursing my 3rd beer while watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. The bartender was a local woman in her early 30s, with kind eyes and an easy smile that suggested she'd heard every tourist's sob story at least twice. "Rough day in paradise?" she asked, refilling the bowl of macadamia nuts beside my drink. "Rough life in paradise," I corrected, appreciating her genuine concern. "I'm Isabella," she offered. "Isabella Santos, and you look like someone who's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders." "Douglas," I replied, sticking with my middle name. "And you're not wrong about the weight." Isabella had that rare quality of making conversation feel natural rather than forced. She was clearly intelligent, asking thoughtful questions that showed she was actually listening to my answers. When I mentioned I was from Denver and needed to get away from family complications, she nodded with understanding rather than prying for details. "Family can be the most complicated blessing," she observed. "You love them because they're family, but sometimes you have to love them from a distance to survive." Her words hit closer to home than she could have known. We talked for 2 hours about everything except the real reason I was in Hawaii, and I found myself relaxing for the first time in months. Isabella had grown up in Maui, graduated from the University of Hawaii with a degree in criminal justice, and returned home to work in the hospitality industry while figuring out her next career move. The following afternoon, I returned to the bar hoping to continue our conversation. Isabella seemed genuinely pleased to see me, and we fell into the easy rhythm of people who'd known each other much longer than 2 days. "So what kind of family complications drive someone to spend their savings on a Hawaiian escape?" she asked while mixing a tropical drink for another customer. I'd been dreading this question, but found myself wanting to be honest with her. "The kind where you discover your family is involved in illegal activities, and they respond by cutting you out of their lives." Isabella's demeanor shifted subtly, her casual friendliness replaced by focused attention. "What kind of illegal activities? Government contract fraud, overbilling municipal projects, phantom work orders, kickbacks to city officials, the whole corrupt contractor playbook." She set down the drink she'd been mixing and looked directly at me. "Douglas, I need to tell you something. And I hope you'll trust me enough to hear me out completely before you react." My stomach dropped. Had I misjudged her? Was she somehow connected to my family's criminal network? "My name is Isabella Santos, and I am a bartender here at the resort. But I'm also Special Agent Isabella Santos with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. I've been working undercover for the past 3 months, investigating suspicious money transfers from Colorado construction companies to Hawaiian shell corporations." The tropical paradise around us suddenly felt like a movie set, beautiful but artificial. "You're FBI." "I'm FBI. And when you mentioned Denver construction fraud and family complications, every alarm bell in my professional training started ringing. What's your real name?" I stared at her for a long moment, trying to process this impossible coincidence. "Herbert Mitchell. My father owns Mitchell Construction in Denver." Isabella's eyes widened with recognition. "Herbert, your family's company has been flagged in our investigation for the past 6 months. We've been tracking money flowing from fraudulent Colorado municipal contracts through a series of Hawaiian investment properties owned by shell companies." "That's impossible. My family doesn't own anything in Hawaii." "They don't own it directly. The properties are registered to investment firms that are funded by offshore accounts that receive payments from Mitchell Construction for consulting services that don't exist." The pieces of a larger puzzle began forming in my mind. "Marcus Wellington. My sister's fiancé is an investment advisor who's been helping my father diversify company assets." Isabella pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. "Is this Marcus Wellington?" The image showed my sister's fiancé standing outside a Honolulu office building, but the caption identified him as Marcus Volkov, suspected international money launderer with ties to organized crime. "That's him," I confirmed, feeling sick. "Amanda's marrying a criminal." "Herbert, your sister's wedding isn't just a family celebration. Based on our surveillance, It's the final step in a money laundering operation that's been running for over 2 years. Marcus has been using your father's fraudulent income to purchase Hawaiian properties that are then sold to international buyers at inflated prices, effectively washing criminal proceeds through legitimate real estate transactions. I thought about my mother's phone conversation about handling me permanently and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. They're not just committing fraud, they're involved with dangerous people, very dangerous people. And Herbert, if you've been asking questions about their activities, you could be in real danger. These organizations don't tolerate loose ends. What do I do? Isabella leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You help us gather evidence during the wedding. You become our inside source, and in return we protect you and build a case that can put these criminals away for decades. The weight of the decision pressed down on me like the Hawaiian humidity. Cooperating with the FBI would mean actively working against my own family, crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. But it would also mean preventing further crimes and protecting other innocent people from becoming victims. If I help you, what happens to my sister? She doesn't know what Marcus really is. If she's innocent, we'll do everything possible to protect her. But Herbert, whether you help us or not, this investigation is moving forward. The wedding is happening in 5 days, and we believe it's when the final money transfer will occur. With or without your assistance, we're going to move on that day. I looked out at the peaceful Hawaiian sunset, knowing it might be the last moment of calm I'd experienced for a very long time. What do you need me to do? We need you to go back to Denver. We need you to get close enough to the wedding to document what's happening, and we need you to be brave enough to do the right thing, even when it destroys everything you've ever known about your family. As I shook Isabella's hand, agreeing to become an FBI informant against my own family, I realized that being excluded from Amanda's wedding had accidentally positioned me to save not just myself, but potentially dozens of other victims of this criminal organization. The flight back to Denver felt like traveling to my own execution. Isabella had provided me with sophisticated recording equipment disguised as everyday items: a pen that captured audio, a watch that took photographs, and a phone case with a hidden camera. I'd memorized the contact information for her FBI team and rehearsed my cover story until it felt natural. I checked into the downtown Marriott under my real name, figuring that hiding in plain sight was safer than maintaining the Douglas alias now that I was working with federal agents. The city looked different through the eyes of an informant. Every face could be a threat. Every conversation might be monitored. Every decision carried potentially lethal consequences. My first stop was my cousin Jake's apartment in Capitol Hill. Jake worked security at Denver International Airport and had always been the family member most willing to share gossip and inside information. If anyone would know details about unusual wedding preparations, it would be him. Herbert, Jake opened his door with surprise and obvious relief. Man, your parents have been telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown and disappeared. Amanda's been worried sick. I needed some time to think, I said, settling into his familiar living room. Jake, what do you know about Amanda's wedding plans? Mom said it was going to be small and intimate. Jake laughed and grabbed 2 beers from his refrigerator. Small and intimate, dude. They've rented the entire Grandview Country Club for the weekend. Catered dinner for 200 people, open bar live band, the whole production. Your sister's going all out. 200 people. That's double what I saw on the guest list. Guest list keeps growing. Just this week, Marcus added a bunch of international business associates. I've been tracking some interesting flight manifests for private jets coming into DIA this weekend. Passengers with Russian, Ukrainian, and Eastern European names all flying in for your sister's wedding. The beer turned to acid in my stomach. What kind of names? Jake pulled out his work tablet and showed me immigration records. Viktor Kozlov, Dmitry Petrov, Alexei Volkov. These aren't exactly typical wedding guests from Marcus's investment firm. Volkov, I repeated, remembering that was Marcus's real surname according to Isabella. Yeah, actually, Alexei Volkov is listed as Marcus's business partner. But here's the weird part, these guys are all flagged in our security database as persons of interest for various financial crimes. Not enough to deny entry, but enough to warrant additional screening. Jake's security clearance gave him access to information that confirmed Isabella's worst suspicions. Amanda's wedding was bringing together an international network of criminals under the cover of a family celebration. Jake, I need you to do me a favor, and I need you not to ask too many questions about why. Anything, cousin. What do you need? I need to get inside the wedding rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. Can you help me get a catering uniform or service staff credentials? Jake studied my face with growing concern. Herbert, what kind of trouble are you in? The kind where the less you know, the safer you are. But I promise you, I'm trying to do the right thing. He nodded slowly, understanding that some family situations required blind trust. I can get you a catering company shirt and credentials for tomorrow night. But Herbert, if you're planning something that could get you hurt, maybe you should reconsider. I'm past the point of reconsidering. This is happening whether I want it to or not. That evening, I tested the FBI recording equipment while walking around downtown Denver. The audio quality was crystal clear, the camera captured sharp images, and the panic button would summon federal agents within minutes. I felt like a character in a spy thriller, except the stakes were my actual family and potentially innocent lives. The next evening, I put on the catering uniform Jake had provided and drove to the Grandview Country Club. The rehearsal dinner was being held in the club's private dining room with about 50 people in attendance. I recognized many faces, family friends, business associates, and relatives I'd known since childhood. But scattered throughout the crowd were the foreign faces from Jake's Passenger Manifest's men, who looked out of place among Denver's social elite. Working as a server gave me access to conversations that would have been impossible to overhear as a guest. I moved through the room, refilling water glasses and clearing plates while the FBI recording equipment captured everything. Marcus commanded attention at the head table, telling stories about his business successes and international partnerships. To most of the guests, he seemed like a successful American entrepreneur who'd traveled extensively and built global connections. But listening through trained ears, I caught subtle references to offshore accounts, currency exchanges, and investment opportunities that required discretion. During a break between courses, I followed Marcus as he stepped onto the club's terrace for a phone conversation. Hidden behind decorative planters, I aimed the watch camera while he spoke in what sounded like Russian. Tada ponimaju, he said, завтра все будет готово. Деньги будут перемещены через 3 часа после церемонии. I didn't speak Russian, but the tone suggested business rather than wedding celebration. Marcus was coordinating something scheduled to happen 3 hours after tomorrow's ceremony. The most chilling moment came when I overheard Marcus talking with 2 of the Russian guests near the bar. They were discussing logistics for what they called the secondary event and mentioned transportation arrangements for the packages that would be delivered to buyers after the wedding celebration. As I moved closer to capture their conversation, I heard my father's voice from across the room speaking loudly enough to be clearly recorded. Marcus has been invaluable in helping us expand our business model. The Hawaiian properties he's helped us acquire have opened up entirely new revenue streams. My mother's voice joined the conversation. It's wonderful to have someone so knowledgeable about international business, helping our family navigate these opportunities. They were openly discussing the money laundering operation at a social gathering, confirming that they fully understood the criminal nature of their activities. This wasn't ignorance or coercion. They were willing participants who'd chosen crime over legitimate business. The evening's most devastating revelation came when I overheard Marcus talking privately with Amanda near the dessert table. She was radiant in a navy blue dress, glowing with the happiness of a bride celebrating the night before her wedding. Tomorrow will change everything for us, my love, Marcus said, stroking her cheek. After the ceremony, we'll have everything we need to start our new life together. I can't believe we're finally doing this, Amanda replied. I keep thinking about all the paperwork you had me sign for the business partnerships. It feels like we're building an empire together. You've been the perfect partner, Amanda. Your attention to detail with the financial documentation has made everything possible. My sister had been signing legal documents that made her complicit in the money laundering operation, believing she was contributing to legitimate business expansion. Marcus had manipulated her love and trust to make her an unwitting accomplice to federal crimes. As the evening wound down, I witnessed the final piece of evidence I needed. Marcus handed my father an envelope containing what appeared to be account numbers and transfer codes. Tomorrow after the ceremony, these accounts will receive the final transfers. Once that's complete, Herbert's interference will no longer be a concern for any of us. My father nodded grimly. Marcus has arranged for Herbert's permanent disappearance. We can't risk him disrupting everything we've built. Standing in the shadows wearing a catering uniform, I listened to my own family discuss my murder with the casual tone they might use to plan a vacation. The recording equipment captured every word, but no technology could capture the emotional devastation of learning that the people who'd raised me were willing to kill me to protect their criminal enterprise. I slipped out of the country club and drove back to my hotel, knowing that tomorrow's wedding would either result in justice or my death. There was no middle ground left. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect Colorado weather that made people fall in love with Denver. Clear blue skies, temperature in the mid-70s, gentle breeze carrying the scent of late summer flowers. It was cruelly beautiful weather for what I knew would be the most devastating day of my family's life. I met Isabella and her FBI team at a surveillance van parked 2 blocks from the Grandview Country Club. The van looked like a standard cable television service vehicle, complete with official markings and equipment that would deflect casual observation. Inside, it was packed with monitoring technology that could intercept communications track movement and coordinate tactical response. Herbert, are you absolutely certain you want to do this? Isabella asked for the 3rd time that morning. Once you activate that panic button, there's no going back. Your family's lives will be permanently changed. They're already permanently changed, I replied, checking the hidden recording equipment one final time. The only question is whether innocent people will continue to be victimized. Special Agent Martinez, Isabella's supervisor, briefed me on the tactical plan. We have agents positioned throughout the club's grounds disguised as service staff, vendors, and even wedding guests. When you signal us, we move immediately. But Herbert, if you're discovered before then, or if you feel threatened, activate the panic button immediately. Your safety takes priority over evidence gathering. I walked into the Grandview Country Club at 11:30, 90 minutes, before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The transformation was breathtaking. White silk draping cascades of roses and peonies, crystal chandeliers reflecting morning sunlight through floor-to-ceiling windows. Someone had spent enormous amounts of money to create a fairy tale wedding setting. Amanda looked absolutely radiant in her wedding dress, a flowing creation of ivory silk and antique lace that had belonged to our grandmother. She was surrounded by bridesmaids in soft pink gowns, all of them laughing and crying with the emotional intensity that surrounds brides on their wedding day. Looking at my sister's pure happiness, I felt like the worst person alive. The guest list was exactly as Jake had described: legitimate family friends and business associates mixed with international criminals who'd traveled thousands of miles to attend a suburban Denver wedding. The contrast was surreal. Children in formal clothes played on the country club's lawn, while men with facial scars and expensive suits discussed business in languages I didn't recognize. I positioned myself near the kitchen service area where catering staff moved constantly between the ceremony space and food preparation areas. The recording equipment captured conversations in English, Russian, Ukrainian, and what sounded like Albanian. Most of the international guests seemed focused on post-ceremony business rather than the actual wedding. At 12:15, I observed something that made my blood run cold. A catering truck arrived at the club's service entrance, but instead of unloading food or supplies, three young women were escorted from the vehicle into the club's basement storage area. They appeared to be in their late teens or early 20s, well-dressed but clearly distressed, moving with the mechanical compliance of people who'd been threatened or drugged. The women were trafficking victims, and Amanda's wedding was providing cover for their transportation and sale. I followed the group toward the basement using my catering uniform to blend in with legitimate staff. Hidden behind industrial kitchen equipment, I watched as the women were placed in a locked storage room with basic furnishings that suggested it had been prepared specifically for human containment. One of Marcus's associates, a man I recognized from the Russian passenger manifests, spoke quietly with the catering supervisor. The packages will be moved to the secondary location 3 hours after the ceremony. Buyers will inspect merchandise during the cocktail reception. Payment transfers will be completed before transportation. My hands shook as I aimed the hidden camera at the storage room door and the men discussing the sale of human beings like they were negotiating a car purchase. This wasn't just money laundering anymore. Marcus's criminal organization was trafficking women, and my family's wedding celebration was providing the perfect cover for their auction. I climbed back upstairs as the wedding ceremony began, my mind reeling with the magnitude of the criminal operation I'd discovered. The familiar sounds of Canon in D filled the country club's main ballroom as guests took their seats for what appeared to be a traditional American wedding. Amanda walked down the aisle on my father's arm, absolutely glowing with happiness. She'd dreamed of this moment since we were children, planning elaborate wedding ceremonies for her dolls, and insisting that someday she'd have the most beautiful wedding anyone had ever seen. Watching her approach the altar where Marcus waited in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, I knew I was about to destroy the happiest moment of her life. The ceremony proceeded with heartbreaking normalcy. Traditional vows exchange of rings readings from scripture that spoke of love and commitment and building a life together. Guests dabbed at their eyes with tissues, children squirmed in formal clothes, elderly relatives smiled with the satisfaction of witnessing young love. Marcus spoke his vows with convincing sincerity, promising to love and protect Amanda for the rest of their lives. My sister's face shone with absolute trust and adoration as she pledged herself to a man who was using her as cover for international human trafficking. During the ring exchange, I caught sight of movement near the basement stairwell. The three trafficked women were being moved again, this time toward a service exit where buyers could discreetly inspect them during cocktail hour. One of the women made brief eye contact with me through the doorway, and the desperation in her expression made my decision for me. I had to choose between protecting my sister's feelings and saving innocent lives. There was no middle ground, no compromise that would preserve family relationships while preventing further victimization. As the officiant pronounced Marcus and Amanda husband and wife, I pressed the panic button that would summon the FBI raid. Marcus leaned in to kiss his new bride just as federal agents burst through every entrance to the country club. FBI nobody move. The elegant wedding celebration erupted into chaos. Guests screamed and dove under tables as armed agents flooded the ballroom, shouting orders. Children cried, elderly relatives cowered in confusion, and the international criminals attempted to flee through exits that were already blocked by tactical teams. Amanda stood frozen at the altar in her wedding dress, still holding her bouquet, unable to process what was happening, as federal agents surrounded Marcus and began reading him his rights. Marcus Volkov, you're under arrest for money laundering, human trafficking, and conspiracy to commit fraud. No! Amanda screamed, dropping her flowers and lunging toward her new husband. There's been a mistake. His name is Marcus Wellington. Two female agents gently but firmly restrained my sister, as Marcus was handcuffed, his tuxedo jacket pulled over his arms, as he was led away from the altar where he just promised to love and honor the woman he'd been systematically deceiving for 2 years. I emerged from my hiding place near the kitchen area, still wearing the catering uniform that had allowed me to witness the entire criminal operation. Amanda's eyes found mine across the chaotic ballroom, and the look of betrayal and hatred that crossed her face was more devastating than any physical blow. "You!" she whispered, then screamed loud enough to be heard over the federal agents shouting. "You did this!" She launched herself toward me with the fury of a woman who just watched her wedding day become a crime scene. But the female agents caught her before she could reach me. Amanda collapsed against them, her wedding dress, torn and stained, sobbing with the kind of heartbreak that changes people permanently. Why, she cried, looking at me with devastation that cut through my soul. "Why would you destroy my wedding day?" Before I could answer, one of the FBI agents escorted me toward the command vehicle, leaving my sister surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been the happiest day of her life. The country club's ballroom looked like a war zone. Overturned tables, scattered flowers, abandoned high heels, and broken crystal glasses created a surreal landscape where an elegant wedding had been transformed into a federal crime scene. FBI agents moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, separating legitimate wedding guests from suspected criminals while securing evidence and establishing witness interview areas. I sat in the surveillance van watching through monitors as my family's world collapsed in real time. Amanda remained near the altar, her wedding dress dirty and torn, refusing comfort from agents who tried to help her understand what was happening. My parents stood handcuffed beside their table, Patricia weeping, while Ronald stared straight ahead, with the blank expression of someone whose worst fears had been realized. Isabella sat beside me, monitoring radio communications from the tactical teams. "We've secured the 3 trafficking victims from the basement. They're being transported to a safe house for medical evaluation and debriefing. Herbert, those women are alive because of your courage." Through the window, I watched paramedics escort the young women toward waiting ambulances. They moved with the careful steps of people who'd been traumatized, but were beginning to understand they were safe. One of them, a blonde woman who couldn't have been older than 20, turned back toward the country club and made eye contact with me through the van's tinted window. She pressed her hand against her heart and mouthed, "Thank you," before disappearing into the ambulance. "How many people are we arresting?" I asked, trying to focus on the justice being served rather than the devastation being inflicted on my family. 37 so far," Agent Martinez replied through his radio headset. Marcus's operation was larger than we initially suspected. The wedding brought together criminal networks from 6 countries, all using your family's construction business as a money laundering front. On the monitors, I watched agents leading away men I'd seen laughing and celebrating just hours earlier. The Russian passengers from Jake's flight, Manifest Marcus's business associates, and several people I didn't recognize were all being processed as federal criminal suspects. The scope of the operation was staggering. "What about my family?" I asked, dreading the answer. Isabella's expression softened with sympathy. "Your parents are being charged as co-conspirators in the money laundering operation. The evidence shows they knowingly participated in fraudulent billing and helped facilitate Marcus's criminal activities. They'll face federal prosecution." And Amanda. "That's more complicated. We need to determine how much she knew about Marcus's real activities and whether her participation in the financial documentation was knowing or innocent." Through the surveillance monitors, I watched my sister being interviewed by federal agents in a quiet corner of the country club. She'd refused to change out of her wedding dress, sitting rigidly upright with mascara streaking down her cheeks as she answered questions about her relationship with Marcus and her role in the family business. The interview lasted 2 hours, during which Amanda's expression changed from defiant anger to confused shock to devastating understanding. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could see the moment when she realized the magnitude of Marcus's deception and her unwitting role in facilitating his crimes. When the agents finished questioning her, Amanda looked directly at the surveillance camera where I was watching and mouthed one word, "How?" Isabella handed me a radio headset. "She's asking to speak with you." "Are you ready for that conversation?" I walked back into the country club past the crime scene technicians, photographing evidence, and the cleaning crew attempting to restore order to the chaos. Amanda sat alone at a table near the windows, still wearing her destroyed wedding dress, looking like a beautiful ghost haunting her own celebration. "Amanda," I said quietly, sitting across from her. She looked up with eyes that had aged years in the space of hours. "They told me everything about Marcus, about the trafficking, about Mom and Dad's involvement." Her voice was hollow, drained of all emotion. "They told me I signed documents that made me complicit in money laundering and human trafficking." "Did you know what you were signing?" "I thought I was helping Marcus expand his investment business. I thought I was contributing to our future together." She laughed bitterly. "I was so proud of my attention to detail, so happy to be useful to the man I loved." "Amanda, I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to find out this way, and I'm sorry your wedding day was destroyed." She studied my face with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. "How long have you known?" "I suspected something was wrong 6 months ago when I found the fraudulent billing, but I didn't know about Marcus's real identity or the trafficking until 3 days ago." "3 days ago, you knew that my fiancé was a criminal and my wedding was a cover for human trafficking, and you didn't warn me." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "I tried to warn you 6 months ago about Dad's fraudulent contracts. You called me a self-righteous traitor and chose to support the family business instead." "That was different. That was just financial irregularities, not international crime and human trafficking." "Amanda, it was never just financial irregularities. It was federal fraud that opened the door to everything else. Once you start compromising your ethics for money, where do you draw the line?" She sat in silence for several minutes, processing the connection between the family's initial willingness to commit fraud and their eventual involvement with dangerous criminals. "The FBI agent said Marcus was planning to kill you after the wedding," she said quietly. "I heard him discussing it with Dad at the rehearsal dinner. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money anymore." Amanda's face crumpled with fresh tears. "Herbert, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I chose them over you. I'm sorry I called you a traitor. I'm sorry I was too proud and too stupid to listen when you tried to warn me." "You weren't stupid. You were loyal to people who didn't deserve your loyalty." "I signed those documents because I trusted Marcus completely. I never asked questions because I was so grateful to have someone who seemed to love and accept our family despite its flaws." She wiped her eyes with a cocktail napkin that had been printed with her and Marcus's names and wedding date. "I enabled human trafficking because I was desperate to be loved." "You enabled human trafficking because you trusted someone who systematically deceived you. That's not the same thing as knowingly participating in crimes. Tell that to the FBI. Tell that to those women who were locked in the basement during my wedding ceremony." We sat together in the wreckage of the country club, two siblings who'd lost their family and their illusions in the space of a single afternoon. Through the windows, we could see our parents being loaded into federal transport vehicles, still wearing their formal wedding attire as they began their journey into the criminal justice system. "What happens now?" Amanda asked. "Now we figure out how to build lives based on truth instead of lies. Now we learn to be family to each other instead of enabling each other's worst choices." Amanda nodded slowly, understanding that our relationship would have to be rebuilt from the ground up. The old family dynamics that had led to this disaster could never be restored. As federal agents began releasing the legitimate wedding guests, I realized that many of our extended family members and longtime friends were learning about our criminal involvement for the first time. Their shocked expressions and whispered conversations made it clear that the social consequences of this day would extend far beyond legal prosecution. Isabella approached our table with paperwork and information about witness protection services. "Herbert, because of your cooperation and the threats against your life, we're recommending relocation assistance. You can't safely return to your previous life in Denver." I looked at Amanda, understanding that accepting witness protection would mean leaving her to face the legal and social consequences alone. "What about my sister, Inori?" I asked. Amanda will need to remain available for ongoing legal proceedings, but if she continues to cooperate fully, the charges against her may be reduced to reflect her unwitting participation. Amanda reached across the table and took my hand for the first time since we were children. Herbert, go, start over somewhere safe. I need to stay and fix what I can from this disaster. As I prepared to leave the life I'd known forever, I realized that being excluded from Amanda's wedding had accidentally positioned me to save her life, even though she'd probably never fully forgive me for destroying her dream. 6 weeks after the wedding raid, I sat in a federal courthouse in Denver, preparing to testify before a grand jury that would determine the final charges against 37 members of Marcus's criminal organization. The Witness Protection Program had relocated me temporarily to a safe house in Phoenix, but I'd returned to Colorado to fulfill my obligations as the government's key witness. The legal proceedings had moved with surprising speed, helped by the overwhelming evidence gathered during the wedding day raid and my months of undercover recording. Marcus faced life in prison for human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy charges. My parents were negotiating plea bargains that would likely result in 10 to 15 years in federal prison. The 3 trafficked women I'd helped rescue were now in witness protection, working with international law enforcement to identify other victims in criminal networks. Amanda had been charged with 3 counts of conspiracy to commit money laundering, but her cooperation with federal investigators and evidence of her unwitting participation had led to a plea agreement involving community service and probation rather than prison time. She'd lost her accounting license and faced years of financial and legal scrutiny, but she wouldn't spend decades behind bars. I hadn't spoken to my sister since the day of the wedding, communicating only through attorneys and federal agents. The emotional distance felt necessary, while we both processed the trauma of our family's destruction, but it also felt like another form of loss on top of everything else we'd endured. After completing my grand jury testimony, I drove to Mount Olivet Cemetery where my grandmother had been buried 15 years earlier. It was the only place I could think of that held positive family memories untainted by recent criminal revelations. I arrived to find Amanda already there sitting beside the headstone, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look younger than her 28 years. "I thought I might find you here," she said without turning around. I sat beside her on the grass, both of us looking at our grandmother's name carved in granite. Eleanor Mitchell had been the family's moral center, the woman who'd taught us about integrity and treating people with kindness. She would have been devastated by what her son and grandchildren had become. "How are you holding up?" I asked. "Some days I think I'm okay. And then I remember that I signed documents that helped facilitate human trafficking, and I can barely get out of bed," Amanda replied. "How are you holding up?" "Some days I think I did the right thing. And then I remember that I destroyed my family to stop crimes that wouldn't have happened if I'd been braver 6 months earlier." We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both of us carrying guilt that probably couldn't be fully resolved through conversation or legal proceedings. "The FBI told me you specifically requested that they protect me during the raid," Amanda said eventually. "I couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt, even though I knew you'd hate me for what I was doing." "I did hate you. For weeks, I hated you more than I'd ever hated anyone in my life." She picked at the grass beside our grandmother's headstone. "But Herbert, I also knew you were right. Even when I was screaming at you and blaming you for everything, part of me knew you were trying to save people. I should have found a way to warn you about Marcus without destroying your wedding day." "There wasn't a way. If you'd told me Marcus was a criminal, I would have warned him and helped him escape. I was too emotionally invested to see clearly." Amanda turned to look at me directly for the first time. "I've been going to therapy to understand how I got so lost that I chose criminals over my own brother." "What has the therapist told you?" "That I was so desperate for approval and belonging that I ignored obvious red flags about Dad's business and Marcus's behavior. That I chose loyalty over morality," because I was afraid of being alone. She paused, considering her words carefully. She says I used you as a scapegoat for my own moral compromises. The admission hung between us like a bridge we could either cross or burn permanently. Amanda, I made mistakes too. I was self-righteous and judgmental about your choices without understanding how trapped you felt in the family dynamic. You were right to be judgmental. I was enabling criminal activity because it was easier than standing up to Dad and risking family approval. But I could have been right and still been kinder about how I expressed my concerns. Amanda smiled for the first time since I'd arrived at the cemetery. Grandma Eleanor would have made us apologize to each other and then forced us to work together to fix the problem instead of fighting about who was more right. She would have been horrified by what our family became. She would have been proud of you for having the courage to do the right thing when it mattered most. We talked for 2 hours, sharing feelings and perspectives that had been building up during our weeks of separation. Amanda told me about the ongoing legal proceedings, her struggle to rebuild her professional reputation, and her plans to work with anti-trafficking organizations as part of her community service requirement. I want to use what I learned from this disaster to help other people avoid similar situations, she explained. The prosecutor said my case could be educational for other women who might be unknowingly involved in their partner's criminal activities. That sounds like meaningful work. It feels like the least I can do to honor those women you saved from the basement. As the afternoon sun began setting behind the cemetery's oak trees, Amanda brought up the subject we'd been avoiding. Herbert, the FBI said you're being relocated permanently because of ongoing threats from Marcus's criminal associates. The Witness Protection Program recommends complete relocation for my safety. Marcus's organization has international connections, and they consider me a significant threat to their operations. Where will you go? I can't tell you specifics, but somewhere warm where I can start completely over. Amanda nodded, understanding the necessity, while clearly struggling with the permanence of our separation. Will I ever see you again? Maybe someday if the security situation changes. But Amanda, we can't maintain regular contact while these cases are ongoing. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, wrapped package. I brought you something. Inside was our grandmother's wedding ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to Eleanor's mother before her. Grandma always said this ring represented the kind of love that endures through difficult times and brings out the best in people. I want you to have it as a reminder that love can be honest and good even when the people around you are making terrible choices. I slipped the ring onto my pinky finger, the only finger where it would fit, feeling the weight of 4 generations of family history and the hope for better choices in the future. Amanda, I forgive you for choosing the family over me, and I hope someday you can forgive me for destroying your wedding day. I forgive you, Herbert, and thank you for saving those women, even though it cost us everything else. As we prepared to leave the cemetery, Amanda asked one final question. Do you think we'll ever have a normal family relationship again? I think we'll have something better than normal. I think we'll have a relationship based on honesty and shared values instead of obligation and enabling. We hugged beside our grandmother's grave, both of us, understanding that this was likely goodbye for several years. But it felt like a beginning rather than an ending, the start of becoming the kind of people Eleanor Mitchell had tried to raise us to be. 18 months later, I stood on a beach in Maui, watching the sunrise paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and coral that still took my breath away every morning. The beach tour business I'd started with FBI reward money had grown beyond my wildest expectations, employing 12 people and providing sustainable income for families who'd welcomed me into their community with genuine aloha. Isabella approached from the resort where we'd first met, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the easy smile that had made me trust her when I was desperately lost and running from my family's criminal enterprise. Our relationship had evolved naturally from professional cooperation to genuine friendship to romantic partnership built on shared values and honest communication. The mainland mail came in yesterday, she said, handing me an envelope with familiar handwriting. Amanda's letter arrived monthly, updating me on her life and legal proceedings while respecting the security requirements that limited our communication. Marcus had been sentenced to life in prison without parole. My parents had received 12 and 10 years respectively, but were eligible for early release based on their cooperation with ongoing investigations. Amanda had completed her community service working with trafficking victim advocacy groups and was applying to graduate programs in social work. She passed her final court review, I told Isabella after reading the letter. All criminal charges have been officially dismissed, and her record will be sealed after 5 years of clean legal status. That's wonderful news. Are you ready to have her visit? The FBI had recently cleared Amanda for supervised contact, which meant she could travel to Hawaii for a carefully planned reunion that wouldn't compromise my security or her legal standing. After 18 months of letters and occasional supervised phone calls, the prospect of seeing my sister in person felt both exciting and terrifying. I think I'm ready. Are you ready to meet the sister who used to consider me a self-righteous traitor? Isabella laughed and kissed my cheek. I'm ready to meet the woman who raised the man brave enough to sacrifice everything to save innocent people. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jake, who'd become our unofficial family coordinator since my parents' imprisonment. Amanda's flight would arrive that afternoon, beginning a week-long visit that would test whether our relationship could be rebuilt on foundations of truth and shared values rather than family obligation and toxic loyalty. 3 hours later, I watched Amanda walk through the Kahului Airport arrivals gate, wearing a sundress and carrying a single backpack, looking more relaxed than I'd seen her since we were children. The past 18 months had changed her in visible ways. She was thinner. Her hair was shorter, and there was a new confidence in her posture that suggested she'd learned to trust her own judgment rather than deferring to others. "Herbert," she said simply, and we hugged with the careful affection of people who'd been through trauma together and emerged as better versions of themselves. "Amanda, welcome to Hawaii. It's beautiful here. I can see why you chose to start over in paradise." During the drive to my beachfront house, Amanda told me about her work with the anti-trafficking organization she'd helped establish in Denver. We've assisted 43 women in the past year, helping them access legal services, counseling, and job training. Some of them are women who were victimized by operations similar to Marcus's network. That must be emotionally difficult work. It is, but it's also healing. Every woman we help feels like partial redemption for my role in facilitating their exploitation. I introduced Amanda to Isabella and the small community of friends I'd built in Maui, people who knew me as Douglas Mitchell, a businessman from Colorado who'd relocated to Hawaii for health and family reasons. They didn't need to know the details of my previous life, but they'd accepted me with the kind of genuine warmth that makes Hawaii special. Over the course of the week, Amanda and I talked through 18 months of experiences and emotions that we'd only been able to share through letters and supervised phone calls. We hiked through bamboo forests, snorkeled in crystal-clear bays, and spent long evenings on the beach discussing everything from our childhood memories to our hopes for the future. The most important conversation happened on our last evening together, sitting on my lanai watching the sunset, while Isabella prepared dinner inside the house. "Herbert, I need to tell you something I've never been able to say properly in letters or phone calls." "What's that?" "I'm proud of you. I'm proud that when our family was faced with an impossible moral choice, you chose to protect innocent people rather than protect family secrets. I'm proud that you had the courage I lacked. Amanda, you've shown incredible courage in rebuilding your life and using your experience to help other people. That's different. That's courage after the fact, making amends for terrible choices. What you did was preventive courage, stopping crimes before they could victimize more people." She pulled out a small wrapped package similar to the one she'd given me at our grandmother's grave. I brought you something else from Grandma Eleanor's jewelry box. Inside was a simple silver compass that had belonged to our grandfather, a Navy veteran who'd taught us about integrity and service before he died when we were young. Grandpa always said that a good compass points toward true north, no matter what kind of storms you're navigating. You were our family's compass, Herbert. Even when we didn't want to follow your direction, you kept pointing toward what was right. I fastened the compass to a chain around my neck, feeling the weight of family history and moral responsibility that came with accepting the symbol. What are your plans when you get back to Denver? I asked. I start graduate school in the fall studying social work with a specialization in human trafficking prevention. The advocacy organization has offered me a full-time position when I graduate. That sounds like meaningful work that honors what you learned from our family's mistakes. It feels like the beginning of the life I should have been living all along before I got lost in the need for family approval and romantic validation. As Amanda's visit came to an end, we made plans for future contact that wouldn't compromise security requirements, but would allow us to maintain the honest relationship we'd rebuilt from the ashes of our family's criminal collapse. Herbert, do you ever regret choosing justice over family loyalty? Not for a second. Real family would never ask you to choose between protecting innocent people and maintaining relationships. What we had before wasn't family. It was a criminal organization that used emotional manipulation to ensure silence and compliance. What would you tell someone else who's facing a similar choice between family loyalty and moral responsibility? I thought carefully about the question, knowing that my answer might be shared with people Amanda counseled through her advocacy work. I would tell them that choosing truth over lies is always right, even when it's devastating. I would tell them that real love doesn't require you to compromise your conscience. And I would tell them that losing people who demand your moral compromise isn't actually loss, it's liberation. Amanda nodded, understanding that these weren't just philosophical concepts, but hard-won truths that had cost us everything we thought we wanted in order to become people we could actually respect. On her final morning in Hawaii, Amanda joined Isabella and me for sunrise yoga on the beach, followed by breakfast at the outdoor cafe, where Isabella and I had first discussed federal crimes and family betrayal. The contrast between that desperate conversation 18 months ago and this peaceful family reunion felt like evidence of redemption and healing. "Thank you for welcoming me into your new life," Amanda told Isabella as we prepared to drive to the airport. "Thank you for raising a man courageous enough to save innocent people when it mattered most," Isabella replied. As Amanda's plane lifted off from Maui, I realized that my family's story had transformed from a tragedy about criminal betrayal into a testimony about the possibility of redemption through moral courage and honest relationships. The Hawaiian sunset that evening was particularly spectacular, painting the sky in colors that reminded me of new beginnings and infinite possibilities. Isabella and I walked along the beach where I'd first confessed my family's crimes and begun the journey toward becoming someone I could respect. "Do you think Amanda will be okay?" Isabella asked. "I think she'll be better than okay. I think she'll become the kind of person who helps other people find the courage to choose truth over convenient lies." "And what about you? Any regrets about the path that led us here?" I touched the compass around my neck and the ring on my finger, carrying the weight of family history and the promise of better choices in the future. The only regret I have is that it took me so long to find the courage to do the right thing. But Isabella, if I hadn't been excluded from my sister's wedding, I never would have accidentally positioned myself to stop those crimes. Sometimes the most painful rejections lead to the most important discoveries about who we really are and what we're capable of when we stop choosing comfort over courage. As we walked back toward our house, I reflected on the life lesson that had emerged from the wreckage of my family's criminal enterprise. True belonging comes not from being accepted by people who demand moral compromise, but from building relationships with people who encourage your highest ethical standards. The family that excluded me from their criminal celebration had inadvertently freed me to become part of a community based on honesty, service, and genuine aloha. Sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as the most devastating losses, and sometimes the people who reject you are actually setting you free to find where you truly belong. If you've ever faced a choice between family loyalty and moral responsibility, I want to hear about your experience in the comments below. How did you navigate that impossible decision? What would you tell someone else facing a similar crossroads? Please like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more true stories about family betrayal and redemption. And share this with anyone who might need encouragement to choose courage over comfort. Thank you for listening to my journey from family betrayal to finding genuine belonging, and I hope my story reminds you that sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the first step toward finding everything you actually need. Until next time, may you always have the courage to point toward true north no matter what storms you're navigating.